sky of the long-vanished natural Earth. Mira took one really awestruck step and tripped over her own feet. Somehow, Marble Bond was there for her. He caught her out. "Are there people here?" she shouted at him. "Where are all the people?" "We didn't get right many adverts for this stuff. His cardboards. Our doctors perfectly still. Mira plucked a few specks from her face. Karen appeared in a flower with Mary on. Karen had both her arms out, and she was laughing. The child was cheerfully climbing her exposed wings. the simplest way I can put it. Vera cut him short with the wave of her arm.
Alright, this is a beach, am I right? That's seawater. That's a rock. Those are ruins. Do you see any star quality here?
Montalban drew a taut breath. Of course I do. Tell me what you saw in that microcosm that I sent you.
What?
The object. The microcosm. That diplomatic gift I can show you. You know, the crystal ball.
Oh, that bubble thing.
Vera shrugged.
I'm too busy for hobbies. I gave it away.
His face fell in raw incredulity. You did what?
No, it was a gift, wasn't it? I gave it away as a gift.
You didn't explore the microcosm? You didn't engage with its interface?
How would I engage with a ball of seawater?
She paused.
I remember it had some little shrimps swimming inside. Were those supposed to be valuable?
Montalban sat up with a look of pain, as if his back ached suddenly. He gazed out to the ruins in the sea. She realized she had failed him in some deep and surprising way. Montalban was genuinely shocked by what she had done. It was as if he had cooked her a 7-course banquet, and she had crassly thrown away the food and smashed all the plates. He slowly tapped his fingers on his knee. He didn't know what to do next. He was completely at a loss. She spoke up.
I see that I've hurt your feelings. I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry.
It's just... sensation. Because we're not exiling the cult to Antarctica, we're promoting the cult to Antarctica.
Why would they go to a place like that? It's horrible there. It's flooding and melting. It's like death.
Because they're very good at redemption work, and someone has to do that. The big ice is the front line of the climate crisis. Now listen, your boss, the Agnes Commissar here, he's a pretty hard nut to crack. But he can do a budget. He has ambitions. He's an engineer, so he wants new hardware. They always do. Montalban bent and smoothed his pocket film against the ground. A monstrous apparition emerged on the flimsy screen. This metal monster brandished a drill in one hand, a backhoe on the other, and its sloping feet were the size of 2 fishing boats. This is a neurally controlled continental reconstruction. It's a giant robot exoskeleton that's nuclear powered and 4 stories tall. Every one of these psychotic things costs as much as a full-scale Mississippi mud dredge. They're airtight. They're fully heated. They've got nuclear life support systems. They're basically Martian spacesuits with wings. Building these crazy things like that's the price of advance for us. They stared. That big robot does look kind of weird. This dog of his has been sitting on his drawing board ever since he was in graduate school. I think no St. Albans could ever find it something. Because it's got no model for it all. It's a wild, macho engineer from power plants. Montalban leaned back on his slab of rock and took his sunlight. We haven't been to these mountains. A monster machine like this makes no sense to me. But nobody thought his invention would without nothing. It turns out it was money. Want a guy like him with a private army of brainwashed robot cultists sighted in a violently unstable region like the Balkans. This is my home, Vera murmured. Fine. It's not his home. If he ventures off to Antarctica, that's a different matter. If he fails there, well, that's one thing. If he tackles the big ice engine, Montalban wiped his sweaty butt. Personally, I really hope that he can somehow pull that off. Sincerely, I hope that. I do. I know that big Aussie is crazy, but I'm with him all the way. Los Angeles just can't take many more refugee Australians.
I would never do anything against Robert and what Robert wants to do.
All right, good. Now you're talking sense. So, let's talk about you. Millette and you. The public face of the new Millette. The consortium needs an attractive young woman with skill and ambition who has some people smarts. We'll be facing a big transition here, A complete change in the infrastructure. That would be your role.
So I'm the project manager.
That's an Aquis title. Your title with us will be Chiefly Hospitality Officer. That is not a figurehead post, by the way. Don't get me wrong. You wouldn't be the workaday prime minister here. You'd be the queen of this place. I'm offering you a crucial post with a lot of situational perquisites. You will be allocating resources over every inch of this island. And I mean major resources, world-class, world-scale. Instead of that ragtag of refugees that you re-educated in the camps, you'll have a top-notch technical support team. You'll have your own office of PR girls from the environmental design group at San Jose State. They're young people like you and me. They're very forward-thinking.
So it's me here, and it's not Herbert.
Exactly. We need a much calmer, gentler hand with this place. You have a much more sensitive, more feeling approach to Miliet than your robot commissar there.
Suppose that I say yes to you.
Montalban leaned down, puffed up his film, and crumpled it briskly. He pocketed it and smiled at it. Then it's our next activity, a conference of the stakeholders. That's a summit of typical Aquis higher circle drones and some ranking dispensation activists. Your boss will be there too, of course. Your brother Giorgio will be hosting that event in Vienna. I'll be there to represent you to the money people. They're some very seasoned investors. They were the trust behind the reconstruction of Catalina Island after the big fires. They can handle this sort of thing.
Why are you doing all this, John?
Because I'm a white knight investor, and I'm saving the world. And, through no coincidence, I'm also saving you. He gazed at her for a long moment. You don't believe me? Well, you don't believe me yet. I've done it before, Vera. I've already done it twice. I can prove to you that I know what I'm doing, though it will take me a while. A merger and acquisition like this can keep a banker happy for years.
You're asking me to betray my comrades here. They're the cadres who did all the work here.
Well, the cult will face a strategic choice, said Montalban. They can choose him, or they can choose you. The attention camps here will be shutting down. They're too controversial. If the cadres are zealots for their great man and his brain intrusions, then they can join him in Antarctica. If they stay here with you, and you're welcome to them, then they can enlist in our repatriation program for the natives of Miliet. We'll be restoring the people who properly belong here. We'll be reconsecrating Catholic churches, restoring the picturesque rural villages, the national and religious elements in the Balkans. They're stakeholders here too, you know.
So this is quite a big, fancy plan you've brought here from your big, fancy city.
It's the way of the big, fancy world. Vera narrowed her eyes.
Suppose that I just say no to your way of the world.
Montalban nodded slowly. You can say no to the world. People often say that here in the Balkans. But it never makes any sense to do that. Why? Why would you say no to peace and wealth and power and security? This arrangement gives you everything that you wanted. It means that you win. It's your personal victory. You took a failed criminal place that was an open sore, and you saved it, you healed it. You made your home island much better than it was in your whole lifetime, and you gave it back to the world. Things are finally as they should be. It's justice. It took Vera 3 heartbeats to realize, with a pang of truth, that she wanted the island all to herself. She wanted Miliet to remain a quiet place outside the world, its own place, an authentic place that was nobody's tool or pawn or property, a wild and natural place, blooming under the sun, beholden to nobody. It had never occurred to her that her homeland might be saved for other people.
You don't believe in nature,
She told him.
You don't believe what I believe. I even believe in reality.
Well, I believe in ecotourism and the heritage industry. Because those are two major wealth-creating industries. Vera allowed him a nod. It won't be easy work, Vera. It's hard work. It will take labor and investment to bring a heritage mediation online here. But I know that we can do that together. I'm sure we can. I can promise you that. In 10 years, right here where we're sitting, the troops of Augustus Caesar will be massing to invade the Balkans. Vera's heart sank a little.
10 years? What? What did you say?
That's right, 10 years. It has to take 10 years. Because the Roman Empire has only recently conquered this island. You could see how new and raw that little town of Palatium is. The Pannonian Wars on the mainland. They will be going hot and heavy right through the Greek cities. That will be a major threat.
I don't understand.
Montalban chuckled. I suppose not. Well, just give it a The Steam Harbor is a very steady, long-term method, as long as it's got a solid heritage connection and a unique value proposition.
I know that must make the most. Can't you come to like a normal person, please?
Montalban raised politics nowadays. Believe me, there are big patches of America that are extremely aqueous in their sentiments. Seattle is very aqueous. Dallas, Madison, Wisconsin, Austin in Texas, they're all aqueous. San Francisco is aqueous. And Canada too. Canada was aqueous before most of Europe was aqueous.
Do you think I'm a fanatic?
I never use such pejorative terms like that. And I despise the evil demagogues who do. You're listening. You're truly a woman of our age. That's what I think about you.
Why are you here? Why didn't you leave me alone here? I never wanted you here. I was happy here.
I know that you think that you are evil. You have no esteem for yourself. But you were created through evil, but you are sweet. You are very innocent. You were born in an unhappy place and died when that place was.